If you're ready to make changes in your life, then stay a while and let deep conversation unlock the place you're most ready to transform. Welcome to Breathtakingly Imperfect, a podcast dedicated to exploring the human experience and sharing of heart-earned wisdom to help you live with love, presence, and freedom. I offer insights from my own journey of healing, peace, and personal growth in hopes of inspiring you to find meaning, fulfillment, and a true love for life. I'm your host, Yesenia. Let's walk this breathtakingly and imperfectly beautiful journey I call life. Welcome to my very first episode. I would like to start by saying that I believe our voices are one of the most powerful things we have. I've realized communicating what we live is an art. Art captures stories, emotions, and moments in time. It's even meant to challenge and interpret differently what we see and consider ordinary. It's expressed freely by the artist and there for anyone looking for a different perspective. The conversations on this podcast will be the kind that are meant to be something experienced deeply within. They're meant to shine light through connection to the parts of us we no longer wish to leave unchanged. And since we're just getting to know each other today, I'd like to share just a little bit of my journey and what brought me to share what I've learned with anyone who needs it the most. My purpose for this episode is to spark curiosity within those of us that are ready to dig a little deeper into our hearts and uncover our own ability to move forward in life, being as true to ourselves as possible in the process. So let's get started. I can't explain it, but I was born with an armor of resilience. I grew up on the south side of Chicago with an unknowingly sense of grit embedded deep into my soul. That's just what it felt like to grow up in the city, especially as I reflect now. And as an adult that has since ventured on to a different state, I've only had the opportunity to see how not only do I firmly believe I was meant to be born there, but in the ways that it contributed to shaping who I am today. Now, I could never speak for all. And as much as I love the city that I was proudly born and raised in, I'm now able to distinguish the constant fight that it was to live there. It just seems that even as a child, life was just obstacle after obstacle. Luckily, I've always thrived in challenges. My city was just setting up the life lessons that would help me find strength in myself later in life. But I was just a seed, and I stayed buried because I felt scared of what would happen if I flourished. My hope is that as we change how we live, see, and approach life, that it's trickled down throughout our generations. After all, many of us are just living what we learn. Life started getting pretty real for me pretty quickly. And it was always full of challenges, but I always pushed through and persevered. It felt like I was winning at whatever was thrown my way. But all that winning became waking up, going to work, going to sleep, and repeating every single day. I was living to survive. It was what I knew and what I became good at. And as good as I was at it, it was completely lived at the surface. I was working and taking care of others, nothing more, nothing less. And I started to take notice at what I now like to call my garden, my heart and my mind space, right? And to give you just an idea of what I envisioned that to look like for me would be a little shy of nothing but grass, maybe a little neglected, but ultimately filled with endless options, a blank canvas. And who I was buried under the surface as a way to maintain what was above it, an easier task. And that's just the thing. Who we really are is just below this garden that we inherited with the purpose, for many of us, to keep it low maintenance. But what if it's meant for more? And what if it's up to us to make something out of what we already have in our possession? Allowing who we forgot existed to begin to bloom gives our gardens a new opportunity to be cultivated from the ground up with the seeds we've had stashed all along. For me, this is literally beauty within. My garden, well, I had unconsciously built it and it just felt empty. It was acceptable, but it was far from what I could create and it lacked vibrancy. I knew that there was potential for more, but I had to start with breaking through the surface. Breaking through the surface for me came during COVID 2020. It brought forward the perfect time to disrupt this garden I could no longer pretend was fine. I could have been a month or 2 or 3 into lockdown and homeschooling my kids when I realized I could not fall asleep at night and that thoughts ran rampantly through my head all day too. Literally felt like there was no way to escape them. I was desperate to find peace at night, at least during the night. So I tried an app I'd seen on a commercial that was on at the time. And I was pleasantly surprised to have made enough peace using that app and within my mind to fall asleep, that I decided if this worked so well during the night that I would try it out during the day too, since my mind just felt equally busy when the sun was out and the days were so long. Trying to sit with my thoughts, even for 2 minutes, involved a lot of squirming and was a lot harder than I could have ever imagined. Not only was I frustrated by this, but I was equally amused. And most importantly, I was curious. Why can't I sit still? Why are these thoughts so loud? Why now? What felt like was always there, like these weren't new thoughts, were suddenly unavoidable because I couldn't bury them deep enough with the routine and the work and the chores and the activities of my day-to-day. They were right there, buried, but trying to resurface. They were beginning to unearth. Unearthing these thoughts marked the starting point of shifting the direction of life directly to what was going on within me for the very first time. It was like if there were arrows present, they would be pointing directly at me. I'd spent my life up until that point always looking out, but never looking in. And listen, this felt like trying to stop a freight train. You ever tried to catch who's driving these freight trains? Sometimes they move so fast, you swear that they're driving themselves. But keep your gaze and focus steady enough, and you'll see that there's someone in there. Thoughts will drive you the same. That is, unless you take notice of the conductor. You know, in this case, the person that's managing all of these thoughts. It's not simple, but it is liberating. The thoughts that ran through my head needed to slow down enough, at least, for me to try to understand them. So I journaled. I decided to pick up a notebook and just write everything that popped into my head. I wrote of memories, nostalgia, what was then my present moment, kind of like a diary entry. And then I just started to include the painful things too. With so many things in my head, it just felt clearing to give them a space where I could reflect on them. One of the things that I began to journal about that was painful was my dad, a man I had not spoken to in over 20 years at the time. And according to me, had no rhyme or reason to even be in my head. I had always just thought I didn't care that he was not in my life. But I was unearthing what was buried in my garden, and he was one of those things. And through journaling, I realized that there are things that prevent other things from growing. Journaling about my dad brought an awareness I had not before questioned in regards to the pain that I had been holding on to. I mean, there were obvious, flags I had ignored, like crying in movies that involved dads and their kids, and I just always disregarded it. In reality, bringing things like this to the surface began to allow me to begin to understand that what was buried deserved a little sunshine too. Breaking through thought allowed me to begin my healing. It was like that sunshine that anything needs to grow. It required me and no one else to make the decision to at least start by having curiosity for the things that were buried in my garden and being able to take a step towards bringing what was below the surface did begin with my dad. It was nowhere near perfect and even took several years after initially deciding to explore it before I felt closure. Even though healing didn't come right away from it, I still consider it a victory. Not only was it the start of my ability to see the growth possible in my garden, but it also set forth a domino of changes that have made and continue to make me feel incredibly alive once again. Even the smallest breakthrough had the power to break through my thoughts, and that's a win. Journaling and meditating both provided a space for me to grow. Meditation crept in like sunlight, helping a seedling grow from the shadows of weeds. And journaling was the life force I remembered I was. It was the air. And I needed both to unearth what was in my garden, especially after I took in what was made possible by my own efforts. The difficulty in the work paid off in the beauty of what I harvested. What I gave the opportunity to grow was always better than what I worked even harder to keep from surfacing. I think I avoided what I once thought were weeds, my pain, because no one wants to deal with them. I would not give it the opportunity to even sprout up long enough to find out what it was. What I discovered instead was that all of me, including everything below the surface, makes up one beautiful garden made up of every kind of flower. It just needed the space to grow. And that growth has brought forward only the freest form of existence with each seed I give space for in my garden. I remember questioning the purpose of existence and being left with no real greater sense of life. How could it? If I was never truly looking in, I'd tug away the essence of my own experience because I'd forgotten it's the most important part of living, to live. Being able to start nurturing myself for every little part of me was just part of what brought about the changes I wasn't aware I was capable of and already beautiful for. I'm a human, not more nor less than anyone else. I lived burying every moment of my life until I realized it meant I was burying myself in the process. I've learned to find peace and beauty in what I've unearthed and have had all along in my very own backyard, feeling and witnessing what comes with embracing my garden versus ignoring what I saw as weeds has had a profound effect, not just in my life, but in the lives of those I'm meant to share this with. Finding the imperfect beauty that laid in my garden all along has allowed me to pave the way of rediscovery for every single aspect in my life. Words are so powerful, and there are so many that have completely changed my life the moment I did something with them. With so many that have inspired me on my journey to live the way we came here to, fearlessly and with love, leading our experiences. That is why I decided to do this podcast, to share and build more paths of self-empowerment and rediscovery. This is just how my garden started, and I've learned and continue to learn so much more since. I began mine by caring for my weeds, which brought changes, strength, and awareness for my life, boundless and fearless growth. My hope is that it does the same for anyone who's ready. I like to view life as our very own gardens, meant to be nurtured, cleared, and just allowed to bloom. So as you go on to explore your life's personal oasis, as always, may you leave here only with what can help yours grow. I am so grateful to have shared the space with you. And if this episode planted something within you, you can water it with me on Instagram, where this community continues to bloom. The link for that is in the show notes. Until next time, keep honoring your growth, trusting your path, and embracing this breathtakingly and perfectly beautiful journey that is life.